A fine wine. Extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. Daniel Appleby did not often use such words to describe the wines he tasted. The other man in the room was waiting to see if he liked this one or not. His future depended on what Daniel Appleby said. If he liked the wine, it would be bought by one of the biggest supermarkets around. It would be sold everywhere. The man who owned the vineyard looked on nervously. His vineyard was small, but it was one of the oldest in the Bordeaux region of France. If he sold his wine, the business that had been in his family for over 200 years would be saved. Daniel Appleby held the glass to his nose and smelled the wine again. He lifted the glass up to the light from the window to see its color better. He was the chief wine taster for Happy Mart supermarkets. If he liked a wine, then everybody bought it. If he didn't like a wine, nobody did. His word was like the judgment of God. "You say you have been making this wine for the last 200 years?" he asked the other man, Monsieur Colbert, a proud-looking man of over 70 years of age, whose hair was still as black as it had been when he was 20. "I am old, but I am not that old, sir," Monsieur Colbert said with a little smile. "But my family has been making this wine since the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. If I may say so, this is the only vineyard in all of France to produce wine in this way. It is my secret." Monsieur Colbert was hoping that his little joke might relax things a little. Daniel Appleby took his profession very seriously. He was the best. He never, ever joked when he tasted wine. He might joke about other wine tasters at other times. In fact, he often did. But he never joked during a wine tasting. It was too important. He was too important. He held the glass up to the light once more and looked at the deep red color before finally putting the glass onto the table in front of him. He had made up his mind. "Monsieur Colbert," he said, as he placed his thumbs into the pockets of the red jacket he wore, the one that matched his tie so well. "You are to be congratulated. This is an exceptionally fine wine, with a strong bouquet and a rich, fruity flavor, with suggestions of blackcurrant. A wine to go well with any game or red meat, or to be enjoyed on its own for its excellent and strong personality." Monsieur Colbert smiled with delight. This was just what he had hoped to hear. "But," Daniel Appleby went on as he took out his glasses from the pocket of his expensive jacket and put them on again, "is this the right kind of wine for the customers of Happy Mart supermarkets? They're used to wines that cannot compare with this quality. Their tastes are less well-developed than those of people such as ourselves. I wonder if they would fully enjoy the finer qualities of this remarkable wine. I wonder if they would be prepared to pay more for such quality." The old man's smile disappeared. Monsieur Colbert was proud of his wine, but he was not a rich man. He had to sell his wine or go out of business. He was getting old, and he owed a lot of money. He needed money if he was to retire with his wife, whose health had never been good since their only son, Jacques, had died 2 years before. This could be their last chance. "I promise you, Monsieur Appleby, that my wine is worth every franc. There is no better wine of this type in the region," Daniel Appleby smiled and picked up the glass again, holding it up against his fleshy nose and allowing the edge of the glass to brush against his neat, sandy moustache. He breathed in deeply through his nose and sighed. "Ah, you're right, Monsieur Colbert. This is one of the best wines I have ever tasted." He stopped for a moment to think of the numerous examples of wine that had passed his lips. This was by far the finest. None of the others could compare with it. And it would be great to add this to the Happy Mart wine list. His wine list. But it would have to be on his terms, of course. "But," he continued, "there is little demand for expensive fine wines, not in our type of supermarkets. Oh, there are wealthy men who will always pay for quality, that is true, but are there enough, Monsieur Colbert, are there enough? The customer of today is the ordinary shopper, not the rich man. And there are a great many more ordinary shoppers than there are millionaires. The shoppers are the ones who make our money for us, monsieur, and we have to please them, you can be sure of that." "Just what exactly are you saying, Monsieur Appleby? Are you refusing to buy my wine because it is too good?" asked Monsieur Colbert, his voice showing more anger than he had intended. Times had been bad, and his small vineyard had always depended on the high prices that wines of superior quality fetch. But fewer people were prepared to pay for such luxuries now, and he knew that the Englishman from the supermarket was quite aware of this. He didn't want to lose his business completely. He would have to see what he was offered and hope for the best. "I am saying, monsieur," said Appleby finally, "that Happy Mart supermarkets always try to offer the best value for their customers. We are experts at selling for the best prices on the market, and you are expert at making quality wine. I say we can combine our abilities and offer our customers the finest wines at prices they can afford." Monsieur Colbert was not familiar with Appleby's way of doing business. He liked people to be direct and open when they were dealing with him. "And what exactly are your terms, Monsieur Appleby?" he asked. Daniel Appleby played with his glass as he spoke, admiring the rich, dark colour of the wine as he held it up to the light from the window. He was used to moments like this, and enjoyed them almost as much as the fine wines he loved. "My terms are the terms Happy Mart offers to all the smaller vineyards it does business with. We like to see fine wines made, but we are realistic about today's market. We offer to buy your vineyard from you and take the responsibility from your hands while employing you to be in charge of wine production." "But, monsieur..." Monsieur Colbert did not like the sound of the idea. "Well, naturally we wouldn't expect you to produce the wine by yourself. Our expert production staff would work under your direction. That way you have the best of everything. You continue to make wine, but you have the money from the sale of your vineyard and a contract from Happy Mart too. A very fine offer, I think you'll agree." What Appleby didn't mention was that once the production staff had learned everything about Colbert's ways of producing his wine, Happy Mart would find some reason to get rid of him. Old Monsieur Colbert spoke again. "This vineyard has been in my family for generations, monsieur. It means a lot to me and the honor of my family name. What price are you offering for a wine which was good enough for the Emperor Napoleon himself?" Daniel Appleby smiled, and he named an amount that took the old man's breath away. It was far, far less than old Colbert had hoped for. "But it would be just enough to pay back the money he owed, and have a little left over. And he would have a job, at least. He would have to retire later than he wanted to, but he was used to working. Old Colbert recovered himself and spoke. "Monsieur, will you allow me a few moments alone to think over your offer?" "Certainly, monsieur. Take as long as you need. Though I will have to leave soon. It would be a pity to go without having our business brought to a happy conclusion. I will take a walk around your vineyard for a while." Daniel Appleby went outside. It was late afternoon. He could see the rows of vines stretching out in the golden light of the sun. He had hardly gone more than a few meters when he stopped. He knew that if his offer was not accepted, the old man would lose everything. He would be no different from all the other small wine producers who had failed to meet the demands of the modern market. No different but for one thing. This wine was the finest he had ever tasted, and he had to be the one to get it. He got it. Half an hour later, the agreement was signed. As Daniel Appleby drove to the airport, he carried with him the signed agreement for Happy Mart's latest buy. In a room in a chateau in Bordeaux, an old man cried. Daniel Appleby took a taxi from the airport to his expensive flat in London. He was happy with the way things had gone. It had been just like all the other times. Sometimes the small vineyards produced wines that sold well, and sometimes they didn't, but Happy Mart always made money. If the vineyards didn't make enough money, Happy Mart could always sell them again. There was always some way to make money. If the previous owners were not left with any way of making a living, it was not Happy Mart's problem. That was the way of the world. Daniel Appleby was looking forward to a new future with the Happy Mart Company. He had been invited to be the presenter in a television show Happy Mart were paying for. It was a show all about food and drink, called Dinner Party, and he would be the show's expert on wines. He would be able to do what he had always wanted, to spend all of his time eating and drinking the finest food and wine. He would show off his expert knowledge, thoroughly enjoy himself, and he would be paid very well. Yes, he had everything planned. His future looked bright. Soon he would no longer have to taste all the awful cheap wines Happy Mart usually sold to its stupid customers. He looked at the lights of the city as the evening sun was setting. The sky was yellow and orange and red. It was beautiful. Unfortunately, he didn't notice the other car as it lost control and crashed into his taxi. The doctors all agreed that Daniel Appleby was a lucky man. He had hit his head against the taxi door and had been knocked out. The taxi driver had escaped with cuts and bruises. Even the taxi had not been damaged beyond repair. The only sign of the accident left on Daniel was a small cut just above his nose. It could have been a lot worse. Daniel had to stay in hospital for a day for observation, just to make sure that he was all right. He did not really mind. The only thing Daniel was not looking forward to was hospital food. The food served by hospitals was plain and very different from the kind of cooking he was used to. He did not mind plain food, a nice lobster cooked in its shell, or perhaps a simple steak served with a basic green salad. Maybe just fresh bread with a good cheese and a glass of cool white wine. He was willing to go without when he had to. When his first meal arrived, he was horrified. It was burger, chips and peas with a glass of orange juice. It looked awful. It tasted worse. Daniel had to call the nurse. "Nurse," he told her, "this burger tastes like salty cardboard. The chips are like soap, the peas are tasteless and hard, and the orange juice is like old vinegar. Don't you have any fresh food here? Are you trying to play some kind of joke on me, or what?" The nurse took away the food, and he was brought a salad instead. Once again, Daniel Appleby complained that his food had no proper taste. The nurse had the food checked by the manager of the kitchen. The manager said it all tasted fine. "That manager's tongue must be made out of rubber," Daniel replied in disgust. The doctor was called, and tests were made immediately on Daniel to see if anything was wrong. There was something wrong. The accident had caused some bleeding in Daniel's brain. It had damaged the part of his brain that controlled his sense of smell. The result was that Daniel had almost completely lost his ability to smell things. Because the sense of taste depends very much on smell, all he had now were 3 basic tastes: salt, sweet, and bitter. He couldn't taste anything else. He could still enjoy the colour and feel of food, but none of it would taste of anything more than those 3 basic tastes, no matter what the food or drink was. That's what the doctor told him. But apart from that, he was fine. "Of course I'm fine. Now, can I go home?" he asked impatiently. The doctor told him he could, and that was what he did. But this time, he went home on the bus. The first thing he did when he got home was book a table at his favourite French restaurant. He did not believe for one moment that his famous nose and tongue were no longer as sensitive as they used to be. It had only been a minor accident. No, a good meal, a glass of good wine, and he would soon be back to his old ways. As for hospital food, well, everybody knows what that is like. It always tastes disgusting. In fact, cardboard would be an improvement on that awful rubbish. After a bath and a shave, he was all ready. He put on his favourite clothes, including his spotted tie and red jacket. He was looking forward to his meal. As always, before eating out, he drank nothing stronger than water. He did not want any other tastes to spoil the sensitivity of his tongue. He had also arranged to meet Justin, his immediate boss, and one of Happy Mart's chief marketing managers. Justin had left a message on his answer phone. He wanted to know if the Bordeaux business with old Colbert had been successful. Well, he would tell him the good news over a delicious meal. They had the best table, the one overlooking the river. Daniel recommended the veal with truffles and new potatoes in garlic butter. But first, they must have Henri's famous onion soup. Henri was the best maker of soups in the business. The restaurant had brought him all the way from Provence in France just to make soups for them. When the soup arrived, he waited for Justin to taste first. They had both turned down an aperitif and had drunk only mineral water to begin with. They had their wine glasses filled with wine from Burgundy, but they would only drink it after the soup. They didn't want to spoil it. Justin tasted. He was a tall man of about 35 with neat blonde hair and a body which had once been fit but had got fatter with lots of good food. He wore an expensive suit and had the look of a man who was used to getting his own way. He was almost as fond of good food and wine as Daniel. In fact, it had been Justin's idea to produce Dinner Party for television with Daniel as one of its stars. "Daniel, my dear boy, this soup is fantastic. Henri has never made better." Daniel smiled. Good old Henri. He took a spoonful of soup and put it into his mouth. He waited a moment for the heat of the soup to go down a little, while his tongue took in the flavour. Salt! All he could taste was salt. It tasted so terrible that he nearly spat out the soup. Justin noticed. "Daniel, whatever is the matter? Are you all right?" Justin, he observed, had already swallowed 2 spoonfuls of the soup. Justin's taste was almost as expert as Daniel's, yet he had liked it. Could those doctors have been right? Had he really lost his famous sense of taste? These thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. This was hardly the time to admit anything about the loss of his sense of taste, not to a man who was going to give him a job that depended on it. He would have to pretend nothing was the matter. After all, Henri's soup could always be depended on. It was always excellent. Nothing," he told Justin. "Just a little something in the throat. This soup is delicious. Do finish it." Justin smiled and finished his soup. He then praised the Burgundy, a wine that was a particular favourite of Daniel's, though tonight it tasted like warm vinegar as far as he could tell. In fact, it tasted so horrible that he had to try very hard not to spit it out. But he drank it. They talked as they ate, and Daniel told Justin about old Colbert's wine. Justin seemed delighted and was looking forward to tasting it. He asked Daniel to bring some to the Happy Mart office the next day for a tasting of some of the new wines Happy Mart had recently bought. Justin liked to try all the new wines before they went on sale, and it was a good way for Happy Mart's wine tasters to practice. Justin also knew that Daniel loved to show off in front of the other tasters. It was expected. "Why, of course," Daniel answered. But he was beginning to be afraid. The veal, which Justin was now finding so tasty, was just a salty piece of soft stuff in his mouth. He might just as well be eating the insides of a cushion, but he dare not tell Justin. The thought of attempting a wine tasting, an occasion he would normally look forward to, now filled him with fear. He would need time to do something. He had to act quickly. "But wouldn't it be better, Justin, if we had the wine tasting at a later date?" he suggested. "Daniel, my boy, why ever would you want to do that? Don't you want to show off your abilities to your employers?" The way Justin emphasized the word employers sounded almost threatening. Justin was not used to his arrangements being disturbed. If Daniel had a reason to change his plans, it had better be good. Daniel had to think quickly. He knew that Justin wouldn't want him on his television show if he knew about his problem. He might even find a reason to make him leave Happy Mart completely. An idea formed in Daniel's mind. A desperate one, but it came out of his mouth before he could stop it. "To give us time to bring over our new employee, Monsieur Colbert," said Daniel. "Old Colbert makes some of the best wines in the world. Perhaps he would be a good man to test out our wines as well as myself. After all, if he is to supervise our new vineyard, it would be a good idea to get his expert advice on other wines, wouldn't it?" Justin sensed that something was not right, but didn't know what it was. He didn't really like Daniel, but had always respected his abilities as a wine taster, even if he thought Daniel was greedy, with too high an opinion of himself. But, of course, if he wasn't able to do the job anymore, then there was no reason to keep him on. "Why, Daniel, I never thought I'd hear you tell me that you valued somebody else's opinion above your own. You must be losing your abilities." "Not at all." Daniel thought that old Colbert was sure to have a good nose for wines. In his business, he had to have. He could simply agree with everything Colbert said. That would stop people finding out about him and save him from a huge embarrassment. He could pretend there was nothing wrong with him and just judge wines on their colour and feel. You could tell a lot about wines that way if you knew what to look for, as he did. Yes, he could use old Colbert to get him out of this mess until his sense of taste got back to normal. But that would be soon, he was sure. Oh, all right, Daniel. I'll leave the arrangements to you. Bring him over, fix a date, and I'll get the wines. But, Daniel— Yes, Justin? Don't make a habit of this, okay? Daniel went to see the doctor again. He had been certain that his condition was just temporary, but now he wasn't so sure. Would he ever get his sense of smell and taste back to normal? He had to know. His future career depended on it. "There's no way of knowing, Mr. Appleby," said the doctor. "In most cases I'd say no, but your brain suffered very little damage. It might recover, but I can't be sure. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful than that." That evening at home, Daniel did something he very rarely did. He got drunk. He got drunk at home on brandy he could not taste. The next morning he had a terrible headache, and he stayed at home. Daniel Appleby had to face the fact that his future now depended on Colbert. He didn't like the idea, but maybe he could use him. After all, he had saved his vineyard for him. It would go on making his beautiful wines. The fact that the old vineyard was now owned by Happy Mart, and the old man was now just an employee, wasn't important. At least Daniel didn't think so. And if he could get the old man to help him, nobody need know about his loss of taste. Surely, thought Daniel, old Colbert could understand the pride we wine tasters have in our profession. After all, he's a proud man himself, in his way. Daniel guessed that Colbert, like most wine experts, would love to try what other wines were on offer. In any case, he knew that Colbert would be needed to instruct Happy Mart specialists on the methods he used to produce his wine. Daniel decided to risk it. He would tell Colbert everything about his accident and his loss of taste. Besides, Colbert owed him a favour, didn't he? But just to be sure, he would tell him that he would get him sacked from his new job if he didn't help. He couldn't refuse then. He would get on the telephone and speak to him right away. No problem. The next few days saw Daniel Appleby busily making arrangements over the telephone with old Colbert, who agreed to be there in 2 weeks. Thank goodness. A week later, Daniel got a phone call from Justin. He had just tasted some of old Colbert's wine, and he was very excited about it. "Daniel, my boy, I knew it must be good because of what you said, but I never realized it would be this good. Once we start producing this, we'll create a whole new market for quality wine. Everybody will want it. And you must get Monsieur Colbert to bring any more of these wonderful wines he may have. The man is simply brilliant. You are a clever old thing, Daniel, but then you are the best in the business. Happy Mart is lucky to have you. I am looking forward to meeting Monsieur Colbert next week. I've invited people from the television company, photographers from the best newspapers, everybody. Don't disappoint me, Daniel, because this is going to be big." Daniel was glad to hear Justin praising him again, but he had not got back his senses of taste or smell. He had had to pretend that he still had his famous nose for wine, whereas he had actually been depending on his eyes and his experience in order to do his job. It hadn't been easy. Old Colbert was going to arrive soon, and he realized that he really would need the old man for the wine tasting. He was not happy about that. old Colbert was not used to dressing up in suits. He felt uncomfortable in a tie. He would much rather be in his old shirt, looking after his vineyard. He couldn't help thinking of it as still being his vineyard, though he knew it was no longer. Instead, here he was at the Happy Mart offices in London, being introduced to a room full of men like Daniel Appleby. And there was Appleby himself, wearing his ridiculous red jacket, smiling and holding a corkscrew. He was busy telling everybody all about Monsieur Colbert's marvellous wines, and how lucky he had been to be the man who had discovered them. Appleby had told Colbert he owed him a favour, and Colbert was not a man who forgot to pay back what he owed. Not at all. Justin was smiling as he stood by the table full of empty wine glasses. He tapped a glass on the table with a spoon. It was surprisingly loud. Everybody turned around to look. "Gentlemen," he said, "Monsieur Colbert has kindly agreed to bring along some more of his wonderful wines for us to taste today. This promises to be a treat indeed. Daniel, if you would be so kind." Daniel turned to Colbert, who then handed Daniel one of the bottles he had brought with him. "This is one we made recently, monsieur," said Colbert. "Shall we taste it first?" Daniel smiled as he pulled out the cork and poured out a measure for the old man. Justin had insisted that Daniel take charge of the wine tasting. It was his way of saying he trusted him. Fine, that suited Daniel. Now he could make sure that the wine was completely under his control, just as he wanted. The photographers were all taking pictures, and television cameras were pointing at him. Good. He was enjoying himself. Colbert lifted up his glass, smelled the liquid first, tasted it, then spat it from his mouth into a small metal bucket kept on the table at such occasions. He looked at Daniel and gave a little nod, barely noticeable to anybody else. That was the signal he had arranged with Colbert. Now he could start showing off. "My friends, Monsieur Colbert has been good enough to allow me to be the first to taste the latest wine from the Colbert vineyard." Daniel paused to pour out a measure into his own glass from the newly opened bottle. "If you would allow me." Daniel did what everybody had come to expect of him. He smelled the glass with his expert nose, breathed deeply, then took a mouthful of the deep red liquid, taking care to roll it carefully around his mouth before spitting it into a bucket. Everybody waited while he looked upwards, as he always did before giving his judgment on a wine. Finally, he spoke. "This wine is truly a fine example of a great wine, full of fruit and with excellent body. It is to wine what a Picasso painting is to art, a true masterpiece. One cannot taste a wine like this and not feel that one has tasted greatness. Monsieur Colbert, you have made a wine fit for the gods." "Well," said Justin, "let's not waste time, gentlemen. Your glasses, please." He poured some into everybody's glass before raising his own. "Let's drink," he said, "to Monsieur Colbert, his great wines, and the man who discovered them for Happy Mart, Daniel Appleby." Daniel felt proud as he saw everybody's glasses raised, proud and glad that it was all over. All of a sudden there was a rush to the wine buckets and the sound of loud coughing. Everybody spat out the contents of their glasses with a look of disgust on their faces. "Vinegar!" said Justin. "Red wine vinegar!" Oui, monsieur, said Colbert. Our latest, the best vinegar made from only the finest red wine, fit for the Emperor Napoleon himself, don't you think? And so it was. The best quality red wine vinegar one could find